The invisible parliament, when bacteria whisper to your brain. Have you ever wondered why a single thought can make your stomach flutter? Why a craving strikes so suddenly, as if it comes from somewhere beyond your conscious control? Why certain fears grip you with an intensity that seems disconnected from reason itself? Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe slowly. Feel the gentle expansion of your abdomen as air fills your lungs. In this quiet moment, something extraordinary is happening inside you, something that has been unfolding since the very first day of your existence. Within the vast landscape of your body, particularly in the intricate passages of your digestive system, lives a civilization. Not a civilization of humans, but of trillions of microscopic organisms. These are bacteria, archaea, fungi, and viruses that form what we call the microbiome. This invisible parliament of life exists in a relationship so intimate, so fundamental to who you are, that the boundary between you and them becomes almost meaningless. They are not invaders. They are not enemies seeking to harm you. They are partners in the most profound sense, negotiating the very nature of your existence moment by moment. Before we begin this journey of discovery, I invite you to subscribe to the Relaxing Science channel. Give this video a like and share your location and the time below. This experience is designed to unfold gradually, to settle into your consciousness like moonlight on still water. We are about to explore something that will change how you understand yourself, your choices, and the very nature of consciousness itself. The story we are about to tell is not one of conquest or separation. It is a story of collaboration so deep that it challenges our most fundamental assumptions about what it means to be an individual. For decades, we thought of our bodies as kingdoms with a single ruler, the brain, sending commands through nervous and hormonal systems to obedient subjects below. But science has revealed something far more beautiful and far more unsettling. We are not kingdoms. We are democracies. We are federations. We are cooperative enterprises where the voice of the smallest participant carries weight in decisions that shape your life. Consider this. The bacteria in your gut produce approximately 95% of the serotonin in your entire body. Serotonin is not merely a chemical, it is the foundation of mood, of motivation, of your ability to feel contentment and peace. When you feel happy after a beautiful sunset, when you experience the warmth of connection with someone you love, when you find yourself moving through the world with a sense of possibility and hope, you are experiencing the work of bacterial colonies that have been negotiating with your brain since before you were born. These microbes do not produce serotonin to be generous. They produce it because their survival depends on your well-being. When you are calm, when you are content, when your immune system is balanced and your digestion is smooth, your bacterial partners thrive. When you are stressed, when you are anxious, when your body becomes a landscape of inflammation and chaos, these same microbes suffer. They have evolved over millions of years to influence your behavior in ways that benefit them, which paradoxically often benefits you as well. It is a negotiation written in chemistry, played out across the vast terrain of your intestinal walls. This parliament of microbes does not meet in a room. It does not hold votes or debates in any conventional sense. Instead, it communicates through the language of molecules. When a bacterial colony wants to influence your behavior, it releases chemical signals that travel through your bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and speak directly to your neurons. Your brain listens. It must listen because these bacteria are not external to your biology. They are woven into your physiology as thoroughly as your own cells. Imagine your body as a vast ecosystem, much like a forest. The trees are your organs. The soil is your bloodstream. The insects, fungi, and microorganisms that live within this forest are not separate from the forest itself. They are the forest. Remove them, and the entire system collapses. Your body is precisely this kind of ecosystem. The bacteria in your gut are not living in you the way a guest lives in a hotel. They are living as part of you, the way individual cells live as part of a tissue, the way tissues live as part of an organ. Yet here is where the story becomes truly fascinating. These bacteria have preferences, they have needs, they have strategies for survival, and some of these strategies involve influencing how you think, what you feel, and what you desire. When certain bacterial strains thrive in your gut, They can make you feel calm and connected. When other strains dominate, you might feel anxious, scattered, or driven by urges you do not fully understand. This is not manipulation in a sinister sense. This is simply biology expressing itself through the only tools it has: chemistry and evolution. The ancient alliance between humans and their microbiota stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. Our ancestors did not evolve in isolation. They evolved alongside these microbes, developing together in a dance of mutual dependence. The bacteria needed a warm, stable environment where they could reproduce and thrive. Humans needed the bacteria to help digest their food, to synthesize vitamins their bodies could not produce alone, to defend against more dangerous pathogens, and increasingly, to regulate their mood and behavior in ways that made social living possible. This realization transforms how we must think about ourselves. You are not a singular entity with a central consciousness that issues commands to an obedient body. You are a parliament. You are a coalition. You are a conversation between different forms of intelligence, different forms of life, all speaking through the language of biochemistry. Some of that conversation happens in your conscious mind, in the thoughts you can articulate and examine. But much of it happens beneath awareness, in the realm of sensation, intuition, and urge. When you feel drawn to eat something, when you feel a sudden wave of emotion, when you find yourself attracted to someone or repelled by an idea, you may be experiencing the voice of this invisible parliament. As we move forward together, we will explore the specific mechanisms through which this influence occurs. We will examine how bacteria manufacture the very chemicals that determine your mood. We will investigate how they shape your appetite and your desires. We will look unflinchingly at how they can create fears and anxieties that feel entirely your own. We will understand how changing the composition of your microbial community can transform your personality, your preferences, and your sense of self. And ultimately, we will discover how to live consciously with this reality, not as victims of microbial manipulation, but as conscious partners in the ongoing negotiation that is human life. This is not a story of fear. It is a story of wonder. It is an invitation to see yourself not as an isolated consciousness trapped in meat, but as a vast collaboration of different forms of life, all working together to create the experience of being human. The bacteria in your gut are not your enemies. They are you, and you are them. The boundary between self and other, between individual and collective, becomes beautifully blurred when we truly understand what we are. The chemical messenger. How your gut produces the happiness molecule. Deep within the folds of your intestinal lining, in the spaces between cells that most people will never consciously acknowledge, a remarkable chemistry is unfolding. Trillions of bacterial cells are working in coordinated fashion, processing the food that passes through your digestive system and transforming it into something far more significant than mere nutrition. They are manufacturing mood. They are synthesizing contentment. They are producing the very chemicals that allow you to experience joy, calm, and the sense of being at peace with your existence. The primary architect of this chemical transformation is a molecule called serotonin. In popular understanding, serotonin is often described as the happiness chemical, the neurotransmitter that antidepressant medications target in an attempt to restore mood balance. But this description, while not entirely wrong, misses the profound complexity of what serotonin actually does in your body. Serotonin is not simply responsible for happiness. It is a master regulator that influences mood, certainly, but also sleep cycles, appetite regulation, sexual function, pain perception, memory formation, and immune response. It is one of the most important signaling molecules in your entire physiology. Here is the fact that should reshape how you understand yourself. Your gut bacteria produce approximately 95% of the serotonin that circulates through your body, not your brain, not your neurons, though your brain does use serotonin extensively. Your bacteria. This means that the neurotransmitter most associated with mental health, with psychological well-being, and with the capacity to experience contentment and meaning, is manufactured not in your mind, but in your intestines, by organisms so small they are invisible to the naked eye. The process begins with an amino acid called tryptophan. When you consume foods containing protein, chicken, fish, eggs, legumes, nuts, seeds, your digestive system breaks down these proteins into their component amino acids. Tryptophan is one of these amino acids, and it is special because it is one of the few substances that can cross the blood-brain barrier, the selective filter that protects your brain from most chemicals in your bloodstream. But before tryptophan ever reaches your brain, it encounters your bacterial partners. Certain bacterial strains, particularly those in the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium families, have evolved the ability to metabolize tryptophan in specific ways. They convert it into a compound called kynurenine, and through a series of further transformations, into serotonin itself. This serotonin is released directly into your bloodstream, where it travels throughout your body, affecting everything from your mood to your immune function to your ability to sleep peacefully at night. The bacteria are not doing this to be kind. They are doing it because the metabolic byproducts of this process are useful to them. But the consequence is that your emotional and psychological state is directly dependent on the health and composition of your bacterial communities. This creates a feedback loop of remarkable elegance. When you are calm and content, your immune system is more balanced, your digestion is more efficient, and your bacterial partners thrive. When you are stressed and anxious, your body enters a state of heightened alert. Your digestion becomes irregular, and your bacterial ecosystem destabilizes. The bacteria that produce serotonin begin to decline, which makes you feel even more anxious, which further destabilizes your bacterial community. It is a spiral that can feed on itself, becoming darker and more entrenched the longer it continues. But the reverse is equally true. When you take steps to support the bacteria that produce serotonin, when you eat foods that these bacteria prefer, when you reduce stress and create conditions of calm and stability, your bacterial partners flourish. As they flourish, they produce more serotonin, which makes you feel better, which further reduces stress, which further supports bacterial health. This is the upward spiral, the virtuous cycle of well-being that becomes increasingly self-reinforcing the more you engage with it. The communication between your gut bacteria and your brain happens through multiple pathways simultaneously. The primary pathway is chemical, through the production and release of neurotransmitters like serotonin, but also through the production of other important signaling molecules like gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which is the primary calming neurotransmitter in your brain. When your gut bacteria produce GABA, they are literally manufacturing calm. They are creating the biochemical conditions that allow your nervous system to downregulate, to move out of the fight or flight state and into the rest and digest state where healing and growth become possible. Another pathway of communication is through the vagus nerve, which is sometimes called the wandering nerve because it travels from your brain all the way down to your abdomen, innervating your heart, lungs, and digestive organs along the way. This nerve is bidirectional. Your brain sends signals down the vagus nerve to regulate digestion and other functions, but your gut also sends signals up the vagus nerve to your brain, communicating its state and influencing how your brain processes information and regulates emotion. When your gut bacteria are healthy and producing beneficial metabolites, they stimulate the vagus nerve in ways that promote calm and emotional regulation. Yet another pathway involves the immune system itself. Approximately 70% of your immune system is located in your gut, in a region called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Your bacterial partners have an intimate relationship with your immune cells. They teach your immune system what is dangerous and what is benign. They help train your immune system to distinguish between pathogens that should be attacked and beneficial bacteria that should be welcomed. When this dialogue between bacteria and immune system is healthy, your immune system remains balanced, not overreacting to minor threats and not underreacting to genuine dangers. But when this dialogue breaks down, when the wrong bacterial species dominate, your immune system can become dysregulated, leading to chronic inflammation that affects your mood, your energy, and your overall sense of well-being. The implications of this understanding are profound. Your mood is not solely determined by your thoughts, your circumstances, or even your genetics. Your mood is partially determined by the bacterial communities living in your intestines. When you feel a sudden shift in your emotional state, When you find yourself more anxious or more content than you were yesterday, you might be experiencing a change in your bacterial populations. When you struggle with depression, when you find yourself unable to experience joy, even when external circumstances are positive, part of that struggle might be rooted in a microbial ecosystem that has become imbalanced. This does not mean that all mood disorders are bacterial in origin. Clearly, trauma, circumstance, genetics, and many other factors play crucial roles in mental health. But it does mean that supporting your bacterial health is one of the most direct and accessible ways you can influence your own emotional state. By feeding the bacteria that produce serotonin and GABA, by reducing the bacteria that produce inflammatory compounds, by creating conditions where beneficial bacteria can thrive, you are literally manufacturing your own happiness. You are not waiting for happiness to happen to you. You are creating the biochemical conditions that make happiness possible. Visualize this process happening within you right now. See the bacteria in your intestines, millions of them, each one a tiny factory processing the nutrients from your last meal. See them producing serotonin, releasing it into your bloodstream, where it travels to your brain and settles into the neural networks that create your sense of well-being. Feel the calm that this serotonin brings, the gentle settling of your nervous system into a state of peace. This is not imagination. This is biology. This is what is literally happening inside you at this very moment, a process so fundamental and so overlooked that most people go through their entire lives never knowing that their bacteria are manufacturing their moods. The ancient alliance. Why bacteria chose to live inside you. Rewind the clock of evolution hundreds of thousands of years. Our ancestors were not the sophisticated beings we are today. They were creatures of instinct, living in small groups, constantly searching for food, constantly alert to danger. They did not have the complex social structures, the written language, the technological sophistication that characterizes modern humans. What they did have was the same fundamental biological need that all living creatures share, the need to survive and reproduce. In those ancient times, the relationship between humans and bacteria was not something that was chosen in any conscious sense. It was something that evolved because it was mutually beneficial. The bacteria needed a home, a warm, stable environment where they could reproduce and thrive. The human body, with its constant temperature of approximately 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, with its rich supply of nutrients from the food we consume, with its protective walls of skin and mucous membranes, was an ideal habitat. In exchange for shelter and nutrition, the bacteria provided services that were essential to human survival. The most obvious of these services was digestive assistance. The human digestive system, while sophisticated, cannot break down all the complex carbohydrates and fibers found in plant foods. When our ancestors ate plant matter, roots, tubers, leaves, seeds, they could extract some nutrition, but much of the energy in these foods would be lost if not for bacterial assistance. Certain bacteria possess enzymes that humans do not have, enzymes that can break down complex carbohydrates into simpler sugars that human cells can absorb. By hosting these bacteria, our ancestors could extract significantly more nutrition from the food they consumed. This meant more energy. This meant better nutrition. This meant a greater likelihood of survival and successful reproduction, but the alliance went far deeper than simple digestion. The bacteria in our ancestors' guts performed another crucial function. They synthesized vitamins that the human body cannot produce on its own. Vitamin K, for example, is essential for blood clotting and bone health. While some vitamin K comes from the foods we eat, much of the vitamin K that circulates through our bodies is actually synthesized by bacteria in our intestines. Without these bacterial partners, our ancestors would have been deficient in essential nutrients, leading to illness, weakness, and reduced reproductive success. The bacteria that could synthesize these vitamins thrived in the human gut because they were useful. Over generations, this selective pressure refined the relationship, creating a microbial community specifically adapted to human physiology. There is another dimension to this ancient alliance that is perhaps even more significant than nutrition. The bacteria in our gut produce metabolites, byproducts of their own metabolism, that have profound effects on human behavior and psychology. When our ancestors hosted bacterial communities that produced serotonin and other mood-regulating chemicals, they felt calmer, more connected, more capable of social bonding. These emotional states were not luxuries, they were survival advantages. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. Our ability to form stable groups, to cooperate, to trust one another, to create social hierarchies and roles, all of these depend on emotional regulation. A person who is calm and content is more likely to cooperate with others, more likely to be accepted into a group, more likely to find a mate and produce offspring. The bacteria that enhanced these social capacities, that made their human hosts more emotionally stable and socially functional, would have been selected for over many generations. The humans that hosted these bacteria would have been more successful in their social groups, more likely to find mates, more likely to successfully raise children to reproductive age. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this created a deeply refined relationship where human behavior and bacterial behavior became intertwined at the deepest level. Consider also the question of immunity. Our ancestors lived in a world filled with pathogens. Every meal could potentially introduce dangerous microorganisms. Every wound could lead to infection. Every season brought new diseases. The human immune system, while sophisticated, is not capable of recognizing every possible pathogen on its own. It must be trained. It must learn. And much of this training comes from the bacteria in our gut. The bacteria in our intestines are constantly communicating with our immune system. They are teaching our immune cells which organisms are harmless and should be tolerated, which are beneficial and should be welcomed, and which are genuinely dangerous and should be attacked. When this training is adequate, when our immune system has learned from our bacterial partners, we develop what is called immune tolerance. We do not overreact to minor threats. We do not develop excessive inflammation in response to benign stimuli. We maintain a balanced immune response that protects us without harming us. Our ancestors, who hosted diverse, healthy bacterial communities, would have had better trained immune systems. They would have been more resistant to the diseases that plagued their populations. They would have recovered faster from infections. They would have lived longer and produced more offspring. Over time, this created a strong evolutionary pressure for humans to develop the physiological structures and chemical signals that would attract and maintain beneficial bacterial communities. Our intestinal walls evolved to secrete mucus that feeds certain bacteria. Our immune system evolved to tolerate certain bacterial species while attacking others. Our digestion evolved to create an environment where specific bacteria could thrive. The relationship became so intimate, so essential, that it would be difficult to say where the bacteria end and the human begins. The bacteria are not invaders that we tolerate. They are not optional accessories that we could do without. They are foundational to our biology. We could not be human without them. We could not digest our food properly without them. We could not regulate our moods without them. We could not defend ourselves against pathogens without them. They are us in the most literal sense. This alliance has persisted and deepened through the entire history of human civilization. As humans developed agriculture and began to eat different foods, the bacterial communities in their guts adapted. Different populations of humans, eating different diets in different environments, developed different microbial communities. A person who grew up eating a lot of plant fiber developed different bacterial populations than a person who grew up eating primarily meat. A person who grew up in a tropical climate developed different bacteria than a person who grew up in a temperate climate. These differences in microbial communities led to differences in digestion, in immune function, and in emotional regulation. In modern times, we have largely forgotten this ancient alliance. We have developed the mistaken belief that bacteria are our enemies, that we should kill them with antibiotics and antiseptics, that a sterile environment is a healthy environment. We have disrupted the bacterial communities that evolved alongside our ancestors through the use of antibiotics, through highly processed foods that do not feed beneficial bacteria, through the elimination of fermented foods from our diets, through excessive hygiene that prevents beneficial microbes from establishing themselves. We have broken the alliance and we are paying the price in the form of increasing rates of autoimmune disease, allergies, mental health disorders, and chronic inflammation. But the alliance is not dead, it is only dormant. The bacteria that have lived with humans for hundreds of thousands of years are still present in our bodies, still capable of thriving, still eager to resume the ancient partnership. By understanding this history, by recognizing that we are not individuals but collaborations, we can take steps to restore the alliance. We can feed the bacteria that support our health. We can create conditions where they can thrive. We can remember that we are not fighting against our microbial partners, but cooperating with them in the most fundamental sense. Appetite's true master. How microbes decide what you crave. You wake up in the morning and immediately feel a craving for coffee. You smell something cooking and suddenly feel hungry. You see a particular food and find yourself drawn to it with an intensity that feels almost involuntary. You interpret these cravings as coming from yourself, as expressions of your own preferences and desires. But what if the truth is more complex? What if these cravings are actually communications from the bacterial communities living in your intestines, speaking to you through the language of sensation and desire? Consider what happens when bacteria need specific nutrients. They cannot go to the grocery store, they cannot make decisions about what to eat, but they can influence the behavior of their host, you, in ways that cause you to seek out the foods that benefit them. When the bacteria in your gut that thrive on fiber begin to decline because you have not eaten plant foods in a while, they send chemical signals through your bloodstream. These signals reach your brain and create a sensation that feels like a craving for vegetables, for fruits, for whole grains. You experience this as your own desire to eat healthier. In reality, you are experiencing a bacterial request. The mechanism through which this happens is both elegant and unsettling. Bacteria produce various signaling molecules that travel through your bloodstream to your brain. Some of these molecules are neurotransmitters or precursors to neurotransmitters. Others are metabolites that influence the activity of your neurons. When certain bacteria are abundant, they produce signals that make you feel satisfied and content after eating foods that benefit them. When other bacteria are dominant, they produce signals that create cravings for foods that benefit them instead. This has profound implications for understanding obesity and metabolic health. The bacteria that thrive on simple sugars and processed carbohydrates are very efficient at sending signals that make you crave more of these foods. They create intense desire. They make you feel like you cannot stop eating sweets. They override your conscious intentions to eat healthier. You might sit down with the firm resolution to eat only one cookie and find yourself unable to stop. You might feel genuine hunger for candy, even though you just ate a large meal. You might find yourself eating foods that you consciously know are not good for you, yet feel powerless to resist. This is not a failure of willpower. This is not a character flaw. This is biology. This is your bacterial partners, the ones that thrive on sugar, literally hijacking your appetite signals to ensure their own survival and reproduction. They are not evil. They are not intentionally cruel. They are simply following the same evolutionary imperatives that drive all living creatures: survive, reproduce, thrive. But the consequence is that you find yourself eating in ways that undermine your health and well-being. The reverse is equally true. When you cultivate a bacterial community that thrives on whole grains, vegetables, legumes, and other fiber-rich foods, these bacteria send signals that make these foods genuinely appealing to you. You find yourself craving salads and fruits. You feel satisfied eating these foods in ways that you never felt satisfied eating processed junk. You no longer need to rely on willpower to eat healthily. Your appetite itself has been transformed. You are now receiving signals from your bacterial partners that align your desires with your health. This understanding transforms how we should think about diet and nutrition. Most diet advice focuses on willpower and restriction. Eat less, exercise more, resist temptation. But this approach ignores the reality that your appetite is not fully under your conscious control. It is partially controlled by the bacteria in your gut. If you want to change what you eat, you must change your bacterial community. And the way you change your bacterial community is not through restriction and willpower, but through feeding different bacteria. The bacteria that thrive on processed foods, refined sugars, and unhealthy fats are different from the bacteria that thrive on whole foods, fiber, and plant diversity. If you want to shift your cravings, you must feed the bacteria you want to promote. You must eat foods that these bacteria prefer, even if this feels uncomfortable at first. Your current bacterial community will resist this change. They will create cravings for the foods they thrive on. They will make you feel irritable and unsatisfied when you try to eat differently. But if you persist, if you continue to feed the bacteria you want to promote, eventually they will become dominant. At that point, your cravings will shift. Your appetite will change. What once felt impossible will become natural. This also explains the phenomenon of food preferences that seem deeply personal and unchangeable. Some people genuinely love spicy food. Others find it unbearable. Some people crave chocolate constantly. Others feel no attraction to it. Some people could eat meat at every meal. Others are deeply satisfied with plant-based diets. We often assume these preferences are innate, that they reflect some essential aspect of our personality or genetic makeup. But research suggests that much of this variation is actually due to differences in microbial communities. The bacteria that thrive on a particular food produce metabolites that make that food taste better, feel more satisfying, create a more pleasurable experience when consumed. If you have a bacterial community that thrives on spicy food, the capsaicin in peppers will trigger the release of endorphins and other pleasurable chemicals. The experience will feel good. You will crave more. But if you have a different bacterial community, the same spicy food might trigger inflammation and discomfort. You will want to avoid it. Over your lifetime, your food preferences have been shaped by the bacterial communities you have hosted, the foods you were exposed to as a child, the foods your parents ate, the foods your environment made available. All of these shaped which bacteria became established in your gut. These bacteria then shaped your preferences, which determined what foods you continued to eat, which further reinforced the dominance of those bacteria. It is a self-perpetuating cycle that can last your entire life unless you consciously interrupt it. This also provides insight into why changing your diet is so difficult. You are not just fighting against your own habits and preferences. You are fighting against trillions of bacteria that have a vested interest in keeping you eating the foods that benefit them. When you try to eat less sugar, the sugar-loving bacteria send signals that create intense cravings. When you try to eat more vegetables, the bacteria that thrive on vegetables might be outnumbered by the bacteria that prefer processed foods, so the signals from the vegetable-loving bacteria are weak and easily overwhelmed. You feel like you are failing through lack of willpower, but what is actually happening is that your bacterial community is fighting to maintain the status quo. The good news is that bacterial communities can change relatively quickly. Some studies suggest that shifts in the dominant bacterial populations can occur within days or weeks of dietary change. This means that if you can persist through the initial discomfort, if you can continue feeding the bacteria you want to promote, even when your cravings are pulling you in the opposite direction, you can actually transform your appetite. You can reach a point where eating healthily feels natural, where your cravings align with your intentions, where food choices that once required constant willpower become effortless. This transformation is not just about nutrition. It is about reclaiming agency over your own desires. When you understand that your cravings are partially bacterial communications, you can begin to listen to them with more awareness. You can ask yourself, is this craving coming from my own body, from genuine nutritional needs, or is it coming from bacteria that are trying to get me to feed them? This awareness does not give you perfect control, but it gives you more choice. It allows you to make decisions with greater consciousness, to understand that your appetites are not entirely your own, and to begin the process of reshaping them. The desire protocol. Microbial influence on your most intimate impulses. There is an aspect of human experience that we rarely discuss in scientific terms, an aspect that feels so personal, so deeply our own, that the suggestion that bacteria might influence it seems almost obscene. Yet the evidence is clear and increasingly undeniable. The bacteria in your gut influence your sexual desire, your attraction to others, your capacity for intimacy, and the intensity of your sexual response. This is not metaphorical. This is biochemical. This is real. The pathway through which this happens begins with the same neurotransmitter systems we have already explored. Dopamine, serotonin, and other neurotransmitters regulate not only mood, but also sexual desire and arousal. When your bacterial community is producing adequate levels of these neurotransmitters, you experience healthy sexual desire. You feel attracted to others. You experience pleasure and satisfaction in intimate encounters. But when your bacterial community is imbalanced, when the bacteria that produce these neurotransmitters are in decline, your sexual desire often declines with them. This explains the phenomenon that many people experience when they undergo antibiotic treatment. Antibiotics are indiscriminate killers. They eliminate not only the pathogenic bacteria causing your infection, but also vast numbers of beneficial bacteria in your gut. After a course of antibiotics, many people report a noticeable decrease in sexual desire. They feel less attracted to their partners. They experience less pleasure during intimate moments. They attribute this to stress or to the illness they were treating. But often the primary cause is the disruption of their bacterial community and the consequent decrease in dopamine and other desire-related neurotransmitters. The influence of bacteria on sexual desire extends beyond simple neurotransmitter production. Bacteria also influence estrogen metabolism. Estrogen is the primary female sex hormone, but men also produce and rely on estrogen. The bacterial community in your gut includes what is called the estrobolome, a collection of bacteria that regulate how estrogen is metabolized and recycled in your body. When this bacterial community is healthy and diverse, estrogen levels remain balanced, supporting healthy sexual function and desire. When the estrobolome is disrupted, estrogen levels can become dysregulated, leading to decreased sexual desire in both men and women. There is also evidence that bacteria influence testosterone levels and function. Testosterone is the primary male sex hormone, but women also produce and rely on testosterone. Some bacteria produce metabolites that support healthy testosterone function, while others produce metabolites that interfere with it. A man with a healthy, diverse bacterial community will tend to have healthier testosterone levels and stronger sexual desire than a man with a disrupted microbiome. Similarly, women with healthy microbiomes tend to experience stronger sexual desire and better sexual function than women with dysbiotic microbiomes. Beyond the simple production of neurotransmitters and hormones, bacteria influence the psychological and emotional dimensions of sexuality. Sexual desire is not purely physiological. It is deeply connected to mood, confidence, self-esteem, and emotional well-being. When your bacterial community is producing adequate serotonin, you feel more confident and more socially comfortable. When it is producing adequate dopamine, you feel more motivated and more capable of taking initiative. These psychological states are essential to healthy sexual desire and function. Without them, even if your hormones are technically normal, you might find that sexual desire simply does not arise. The bacteria in your gut also influence your capacity for emotional intimacy and bonding. When you are with someone you love, when you feel deeply connected to another person, when you experience the warmth of genuine intimacy, you're experiencing the effects of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. Oxytocin is produced in your brain, but its production is influenced by the overall health and balance of your nervous system, which is profoundly influenced by your bacterial community. People with healthy microbiomes tend to have an easier time forming deep emotional bonds and experiencing genuine intimacy. This creates an interesting paradox. Your sexual desire, your capacity for intimacy, your ability to form lasting bonds with others, these feel like the most personal, most individual aspects of human experience. Yet they are partially determined by the bacteria in your gut. When you feel a strong attraction to someone, when you experience intense sexual desire, when you feel deeply bonded to a partner, you are experiencing the collaborative work of your own neurobiology and your bacterial partners. The boundary between self and other becomes blurred, not only between you and your bacteria, but also between you and the person you are intimate with. The implications of this understanding are both liberating and unsettling. On one hand, if your sexual desire has diminished, If you are struggling with sexual dysfunction, if you find it difficult to form emotional bonds, one avenue of exploration is the health of your microbiome. By supporting your bacterial health, by feeding the bacteria that support sexual function and emotional bonding, you might restore aspects of your sexuality and intimacy that you thought were lost. This is not a substitute for therapy or medical treatment when these are needed, but it is a powerful tool that has been largely overlooked. On the other hand, this understanding raises uncomfortable questions about autonomy and consent. If your sexual desires are partially determined by bacteria in your gut, to what extent are they truly your desires? If bacteria can influence who you are attracted to, if they can increase or decrease your sexual desire, does this mean your sexual choices are not entirely your own? These are not easy questions, and the answers are not simple, but they are worth contemplating. The honest answer is that your sexual desires, like all of your desires, are the product of multiple influences. Your genetics, your experiences, your culture, your conscious preferences, and your bacterial community all play roles in shaping what you desire and how you experience sexuality. No single factor completely determines your sexuality, but each factor contributes. Your bacterial community is one of these factors, and often an underestimated one. Understanding this does not diminish your agency, it expands it. When you recognize that your desires are partially shaped by factors beyond your conscious awareness, you gain the opportunity to examine those factors and potentially influence them. You can ask yourself, do my sexual desires align with my values and my intentions? If not, what might be contributing to this misalignment? Is it my circumstances? Is it my emotional state? Is it the health of my microbiome? By asking these questions, by becoming conscious of the factors that shape your sexuality, you gain more choice, not less. There is also something beautiful in recognizing that your sexuality is not purely individual, but is shaped by your relationship with the living world inside you. Your sexual desire is not just about you and another person. It is about the vast ecosystem of bacteria living within you, all working together to create the experience of desire, attraction, and intimacy. This might seem strange at first, but it is actually a profound truth about the interconnected nature of existence. You are never truly alone. Even in your most intimate moments, you are in relationship with trillions of other living beings. Fear's bacterial roots. When your phobias belong to someone else, there is a phenomenon that psychology has long recognized but not fully explained. Some fears seem irrational, disproportionate to any real danger, yet feel absolutely real and overwhelming to the person experiencing them. A person might be terrified of heights, even though they have never had a traumatic experience with heights. Another might experience crippling anxiety around social situations, despite having no obvious reason to fear other people. Another might have a phobia of a specific animal that they have never encountered in any threatening way. We have tended to attribute these fears to genetics, to early childhood experiences, to some combination of nature and nurture. But what if another factor is at play? What if some of our deepest fears are actually being generated by the bacteria in our gut? This might sound like a wild claim, but the mechanism is scientifically sound. The bacteria in your gut produce a wide range of metabolites that influence your nervous system. Some of these metabolites promote calm and relaxation. Others promote alertness and vigilance. When certain bacterial strains are dominant, they produce metabolites that create a state of heightened anxiety and fear sensitivity. Your nervous system becomes tuned to detect threats. Your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear processing, becomes hyperactive. You find yourself jumping at small noises. You feel anxious in situations that most people find benign. Your world becomes a landscape of potential dangers. The mechanisms through which this happens are multiple and interconnected. First, certain bacteria produce metabolites that increase inflammation in your gut. This inflammation travels through your bloodstream and can reach your brain, where it activates microglia, the immune cells of the brain. When microglia are activated, they create a state of neuroinflammation that is associated with anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders. You feel anxious not because of any real threat, but because your brain is inflamed. Second, some bacteria produce metabolites that interfere with the production of GABA, the primary calming neurotransmitter in your brain. Without adequate GABA, your nervous system cannot downregulate. It cannot shift from the fight or flight state into the rest and digest state. You remain in a constant state of low-level vigilance, always ready to respond to threats, always expecting danger. Over time, this chronic state of hypervigilance can develop into anxiety disorders, panic attacks, and specific phobias. Third, some bacteria influence the production of glutamate, an excitatory neurotransmitter that is essential in normal amounts but becomes toxic to neurons when present in excess. When certain bacteria are dominant, they promote excessive glutamate production, which overstimulates your neurons and creates a state of nervous system excitation that feels like anxiety and fear. Consider the experience of social anxiety. A person with social anxiety experiences intense fear and discomfort when around other people. They worry about being judged, about saying something wrong, about being the center of attention. This fear feels real and often overwhelming. The person usually attributes it to shyness, to past negative social experiences, or to low self-esteem. But what if the underlying cause is actually a dysbiotic microbiome, a bacterial community that is producing metabolites that create a state of social fear? When this person's bacterial community is restored to health, when the bacteria that produce calming metabolites become dominant, something remarkable often happens. The social anxiety decreases, not through any conscious effort, not through therapy or medication, but simply because the neurochemical state that was supporting the anxiety has changed. The person finds themselves feeling more confident in social situations. They feel less judged. They find it easier to engage with others. The fear has not disappeared because they overcame it through willpower or because they processed some trauma. It has diminished because the bacterial composition of their gut has changed, and with it, the neurochemical state of their brain. Specific phobias can also be influenced by microbiome health. A person with a phobia of spiders, for example, experiences intense fear when they see a spider. This fear is often completely disproportionate to any actual danger the spider poses. The person usually cannot explain why they are so afraid. They know rationally that the spider is not a threat, yet they cannot control their fear response. This type of phobia has usually been attributed to genetics or to some early conditioning experience that the person may not even consciously remember. But consider another possibility. What if this person's microbiome is dysbiotic, producing metabolites that create a state of heightened threat detection? In this state, the amygdala is hyperactive, and the brain's threat detection systems are on high alert. When the person sees a spider, their threat detection systems, already in a state of hypervigilance, immediately flag the spider as dangerous. The person experiences overwhelming fear, not because of anything unique about spiders, but because their nervous system is in a state where it perceives threats everywhere. If this person were to restore their microbiome to health, if they were to cultivate a bacterial community that produces calming metabolites and reduces neuroinflammation, their threat detection systems would normalize. The spider would no longer trigger such an intense fear response. This understanding does not mean that all phobias are microbial in origin. Clearly, some phobias develop from traumatic experiences or from specific conditioning. A person who has been attacked by a dog might develop a phobia of dogs for reasons that have nothing to do with their microbiome. But it does mean that microbiome health can either exacerbate or ameliorate phobias. A person with a dysbiotic microbiome might develop phobias that they would not have developed if their microbiome were healthy, or a person with a pre-existing phobia might find that restoring their microbiome health makes the phobia much more manageable. There is also evidence that certain bacterial strains are associated with anxiety disorders more generally. The firmicutes to bacteroides ratio, a measure of the balance between two major bacterial phyla, is often elevated in people with anxiety disorders. When this ratio is normalized, anxiety symptoms often improve. Similarly, people with low diversity in their bacterial communities, people who have a limited number of different bacterial species, tend to have higher rates of anxiety and depression. When diversity is restored, when people cultivate a rich, diverse bacterial community, their mental health often improves. The practical implication of this understanding is profound. If you struggle with anxiety, with phobias, with a sense of constant fear or dread, one avenue of exploration is your microbiome. By supporting the growth of bacteria that produce calming metabolites, by reducing the dominance of bacteria that promote inflammation and neuroinflammation, you might find that your anxiety naturally decreases. You might find that fears that have plagued you for years begin to lose their grip. You might discover that the courage you have been trying to cultivate through willpower and therapy can also be cultivated through supporting your bacterial partners. This does not mean you should abandon therapy or medication if these are helping you. But it does mean that you have additional tools at your disposal. You have the ability to influence your own neurochemistry through the foods you eat, through the lifestyle choices you make, through the conscious cultivation of a bacterial community that supports your mental health. Your fear is not just in your mind, it is also in your gut, and by healing your gut, you can heal your mind. The mood architect. How bacterial communities shape your personality. Close your eyes and think about your personality. Consider the traits that define you. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you naturally optimistic or do you tend toward pessimism? Are you anxious or calm? Are you impulsive or thoughtful? Are you creative or practical? These traits feel fundamental to who you are. They feel like the essence of your personality. Yet, what if much of what you experience as your personality is actually the result of the bacterial communities living in your gut? This is not to say that personality is entirely determined by bacteria. Clearly, genetics, experiences, culture, and conscious choices all play roles in shaping personality. But the evidence increasingly suggests that the microbiome is a major factor that has been largely overlooked. The bacteria in your gut, through the production of neurotransmitters and metabolites, create the neurochemical environment that shapes how you perceive the world, how you respond to challenges, how you relate to other people. Consider the difference between someone who is naturally optimistic and someone who is naturally pessimistic. The optimist tends to see possibilities where others see obstacles. When facing a challenge, they assume they can overcome it. When something goes wrong, they tend to interpret it as temporary and specific to the situation rather than as a permanent reflection of their capabilities. The pessimist, by contrast, tends to see obstacles where others see possibilities. When facing a challenge, they doubt their ability to overcome it. When something goes wrong, they tend to interpret it as permanent and as a reflection of their fundamental inadequacy. These different outlooks on life are often attributed to personality type or to past experiences, but they are also shaped by neurochemistry. An optimistic outlook requires adequate dopamine, which promotes motivation and the sense of possibility. It requires adequate serotonin, which supports mood and the sense of contentment. It requires adequate GABA, which supports calm and the absence of anxiety. A pessimistic outlook, by contrast, is often associated with low dopamine, low serotonin, and low GABA. The person lacks the neurochemical foundation for optimism. Now consider the bacterial origin of these neurotransmitters. The bacteria in your gut produce much of the dopamine, serotonin, and GABA that circulate through your body. If your bacterial community is producing adequate amounts of these neurotransmitters, you will tend toward optimism. If your bacterial community is not producing adequate amounts, you will tend toward pessimism. You might interpret your pessimism as a realistic assessment of the world, not realizing that it is actually a reflection of your neurochemistry, which is a reflection of your microbiome. This has profound implications for how you might change your personality. If you are a pessimist who wants to become more optimistic, you have several options. You could work on changing your thoughts through cognitive behavioral therapy. You could examine your past experiences and process trauma. These approaches can be helpful, but there is another approach that is often overlooked. You could change your bacterial community. By feeding the bacteria that produce dopamine and serotonin, by reducing inflammation in your gut, by supporting the growth of a healthy microbiome, you might find that optimism becomes more natural to you. You might find that your baseline mood shifts. You might find that you are more inclined to see possibilities rather than obstacles. The same principle applies to introversion and extroversion. These traits are often thought to be fixed, to reflect some fundamental aspect of personality that cannot be changed, but they are actually influenced by neurochemistry. Introversion is associated with higher baseline dopamine sensitivity. Introverts have nervous systems that are easily overstimulated by social interaction. Extroversion is associated with lower dopamine sensitivity. Extroverts require more stimulation to feel engaged. They seek out social interaction because their nervous systems need it. But dopamine sensitivity is not fixed. It can be influenced by the microbiome. The bacteria in your gut influence dopamine production and also influence dopamine receptor density and sensitivity. If you want to become more extroverted, one approach is to work on your social skills and to gradually expose yourself to more social interaction. But another approach is to support your microbiome in ways that optimize dopamine function. You might find that as your microbiome improves, you naturally become more inclined towards social interaction. Creativity is another personality trait that is influenced by microbiome health. Creative thinking requires the ability to make novel connections between ideas, to see possibilities that others miss, to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. These cognitive capacities are supported by healthy dopamine and serotonin function. When your microbiome is dysbiotic, when you are not producing adequate dopamine and serotonin, creative thinking becomes difficult. Your mind feels stuck. You struggle to generate new ideas. You find yourself repeating the same thought patterns over and over. But when your microbiome is healthy, when you are producing adequate dopamine and serotonin, creative thinking becomes easier. Ideas flow. You make novel connections. You find yourself thinking in new ways. You might attribute this to inspiration or to circumstance, not realizing that the fundamental shift is in your neurochemistry, which is a reflection of your microbiome. Anxiety is a personality trait that is profoundly influenced by microbiome health. Some people are naturally anxious. They worry easily. They anticipate problems. They are sensitive to criticism. They tend to interpret ambiguous situations as threatening. This anxious personality trait is usually attributed to genetics or to early childhood experiences, but it is also influenced by the balance of neurotransmitters in your brain, which is influenced by your microbiome. When your microbiome is dysbiotic, when you are not producing adequate GABA and serotonin, anxiety becomes your default state. Your nervous system is in a state of vigilance. You perceive threats everywhere. You worry constantly. You find it difficult to relax. But when your microbiome is healthy, when you are producing adequate GABA and serotonin, anxiety becomes less intense. You can still experience appropriate caution and concern, but you are not trapped in constant worry. You can relax. You can trust. You can move through the world with greater ease. This understanding suggests that personality is not as fixed as we often assume. While genetics certainly plays a role, while early experiences shape us, personality is also malleable. It can be influenced by conscious choice, by therapeutic work, by spiritual practice, and also by microbiome health. If you want to become a different kind of person, if you want to shift your personality in some way, supporting your microbiome is one of the most direct and accessible approaches available to you. The implications of this are both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it means that you have more agency than you might have thought. You are not trapped by your personality. You can change it. Humbling because it means that much of what you experience as your personality, much of what feels like the essence of who you are, is actually the product of trillions of bacteria living inside you. You are not a unified self, you are a collaboration. You are a negotiation between different forms of intelligence, different forms of life, and that negotiation is expressed through your personality. Dysbiosis. When the colony rebels against its host, there exists a state of profound imbalance in the microbial world within your body, a state where the ancient alliance between you and your bacterial partners breaks down. This state is called dysbiosis. It is not a single disease or condition, but rather a disruption of the normal balance and diversity of microbial communities. When dysbiosis occurs, the bacteria that support your health decline, while bacteria that promote inflammation and dysfunction become dominant. The consequences ripple through every system of your body, affecting your digestion, your immunity, your mood, your energy, and your overall sense of well-being. Dysbiosis does not happen by accident. It happens because the conditions that favor beneficial bacteria have been disrupted. The primary culprit in modern times is antibiotic use. Antibiotics are miracle drugs that have saved countless lives by eliminating pathogenic bacteria, but they are also indiscriminate killers. When you take an antibiotic, it does not just eliminate the pathogenic bacteria causing your infection. It also eliminates vast numbers of beneficial bacteria in your gut. A single course of antibiotics can reduce the diversity of your microbiome by up to 90%. While your microbiome will begin to recover after antibiotics are stopped, the recovery is often incomplete. The beneficial bacteria that were present before the antibiotic treatment may not fully re-establish themselves. Instead, other bacteria, less beneficial ones, may fill the ecological niche that was created by the antibiotic. Over time, if you take multiple courses of antibiotics, if you are exposed to antibiotics repeatedly, your microbiome becomes increasingly dysbiotic. But antibiotics are not the only cause of dysbiosis. The modern diet is a major contributor. The typical modern diet is high in processed foods, refined grains, sugar, and unhealthy fats, and low in fiber and plant diversity. The bacteria that thrive on this diet are primarily firmicutes, bacteria that are efficient at extracting energy from simple carbohydrates and fats. The bacteria that thrive on fiber and plant diversity, primarily Bacteroides, decline. The ratio of firmicutes to Bacteroides becomes skewed, and this imbalance is associated with obesity, metabolic disease, and mood disorders. Furthermore, the modern diet lacks the fermented foods that traditionally provided beneficial bacteria to the digestive system. In traditional cultures, fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and kombucha were consumed regularly. These foods provided a constant supply of beneficial bacteria, but in the modern Western diet, these foods have largely disappeared. We have replaced them with processed foods that actively harm beneficial bacteria. Stress is another major cause of dysbiosis. When you are under chronic stress, your body produces stress hormones like cortisol. These hormones change the environment in your gut in ways that favor pathogenic bacteria and harm beneficial bacteria. Additionally, stress activates your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system. In this state, your digestion becomes suppressed. Blood flow is diverted away from your digestive system and toward your muscles. Your intestinal motility changes. The conditions that favor beneficial bacteria are disrupted. Over time, chronic stress leads to chronic dysbiosis. Sleep disruption is another factor. When you do not sleep enough, when your sleep is poor quality, your circadian rhythms become dysregulated. Your gut bacteria have circadian rhythms too. They are most active at certain times of the day. When your circadian rhythms are disrupted, the circadian rhythms of your bacteria are disrupted. They cannot function optimally. Over time, this leads to dysbiosis. Excessive hygiene is another surprising cause of dysbiosis. In modern culture, we have become obsessed with cleanliness and the elimination of bacteria. We use antibacterial soaps, we sanitize our environments, we avoid contact with dirt and natural environments. While some hygiene is important, excessive hygiene prevents beneficial bacteria from establishing themselves in our bodies. It is particularly problematic in childhood when the microbiome is being established. Children who grow up in overly sanitized environments often develop dysbiotic microbiomes and are more prone to allergies, autoimmune diseases, and mental health disorders. When dysbiosis occurs, the consequences are severe and multifaceted. The first consequence is usually digestive disruption. Without beneficial bacteria to help digest your food, to produce the enzymes necessary to break down complex carbohydrates, your digestion becomes inefficient. You experience bloating, gas, constipation, or diarrhea. You do not extract optimal nutrition from your food. You might become nutrient deficient despite eating adequate amounts of food. The second consequence is immune dysregulation. Your beneficial bacteria train your immune system, teaching it what is dangerous and what is benign. When your beneficial bacteria decline, this training is lost. Your immune system becomes confused. It might begin attacking harmless substances, leading to allergies and food sensitivities. It might begin attacking your own body, leading to autoimmune diseases. Or it might become too permissive, failing to attack genuine pathogens, leaving you vulnerable to infections. The third consequence is increased intestinal permeability, often called leaky gut. Your intestinal wall is lined with cells that are tightly joined together, creating a barrier that allows nutrients through while keeping pathogens and toxins out. Beneficial bacteria produce metabolites that support the integrity of this barrier. When beneficial bacteria decline, the barrier becomes compromised. Larger molecules, bacterial lipopolysaccharides and other harmful substances can pass through the intestinal wall into your bloodstream. This triggers systemic inflammation, which affects your entire body, including your brain. The fourth consequence is neuroinflammation and mood disorders. As we have discussed, when dysbiosis occurs, the bacteria that produce serotonin, dopamine, and GABA decline. Additionally, dysbiosis leads to increased intestinal permeability, which allows bacterial lipopolysaccharides to enter your bloodstream and reach your brain, where they trigger inflammation. The combination of decreased production of mood-supporting neurotransmitters and increased neuroinflammation leads to depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders. Dysbiosis also affects your metabolism. The bacteria in your gut influence how you store fat, how you metabolize glucose, how you regulate your appetite. When dysbiosis occurs, your metabolism becomes dysregulated. You gain weight more easily. You develop cravings for unhealthy foods. You struggle with blood sugar control. You might develop insulin resistance and eventually type 2 diabetes. The experience of dysbiosis is often described by sufferers as a loss of self. They report feeling depressed, anxious, foggy, unmotivated. They lose interest in activities that once brought them joy. They feel disconnected from their bodies. They experience cravings they cannot control. They feel like they are not themselves, and in a very real sense, they are not. The bacterial community that normally supports their well-being has been disrupted. They are experiencing the world through a dysbiotic lens, a neurochemical state that is not optimal for human flourishing. The recognition of dysbiosis has led to the development of various interventions aimed at restoring a healthy microbiome. Probiotics, which are live beneficial bacteria, are sometimes recommended. Prebiotics, which are foods that feed beneficial bacteria, are sometimes recommended. Dietary changes, stress reduction, improved sleep, and reduced antibiotic use are all part of a comprehensive approach to restoring microbiome health. But the process can be slow and often requires sustained effort. The dysbiotic state is stable in many ways. It is self-perpetuating. The dysbiotic bacteria produce metabolites that make you crave unhealthy foods, which further reinforces dysbiosis. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort and sustained commitment. Yet it is possible. Dysbiosis is not permanent. The human microbiome is remarkably resilient. Given the right conditions, beneficial bacteria can re-establish themselves. The ancient alliance can be restored. And as it is restored, as the bacterial community returns to health, the person often experiences a remarkable transformation. The depression lifts, the anxiety decreases, energy returns, digestion improves, cravings shift. The person feels like themselves again. They have recovered not just their health, but their sense of self. The fermentation symphony. How digestion becomes neurochemistry. Imagine a concert where every instrument is necessary, where the absence of even one musician would disrupt the harmony. This concert is happening inside you right now, in your digestive system. It is a symphony of fermentation, a complex process where bacteria break down food, transform it into metabolites, and in the process create the neurochemical foundations of your mental and physical health. The process begins the moment you eat. When you consume food, particularly food rich in fiber and complex carbohydrates, the bacteria in your colon begin to ferment this food. Fermentation is an ancient process, the same process that humans have used for thousands of years to preserve food and create beverages like wine and beer. But in your colon, fermentation is not just about preservation. It is about transformation. It is about taking complex molecules and breaking them down into simpler compounds that have profound effects on your biology. One of the primary products of this fermentation process is short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, propionate, and acetate. These are molecules that have dramatic effects on your physiology. Butyrate, for example, is the primary fuel for the cells that line your colon. When your bacteria produce adequate butyrate, these cells are healthy and strong. They create a robust barrier that prevents pathogens and toxins from entering your bloodstream. But when bacterial fermentation is impaired, when butyrate production declines, the cells lining your colon weaken. The barrier becomes compromised. This is the beginning of leaky gut, a condition that leads to systemic inflammation. Butyrate also has profound effects on your brain. It can cross the blood-brain barrier and directly influence neuronal function. It increases the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a molecule that supports the growth and resilience of neurons. It increases the production of GABA, the primary calming neurotransmitter. It reduces neuroinflammation. In essence, when your bacteria produce adequate butyrate through fermentation, they are directly supporting the health and function of your brain. The fermentation process also produces metabolites that influence your immune system. One of these metabolites is lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. When produced in excess, LPS is inflammatory and harmful. But when produced in appropriate amounts, LPS actually trains your immune system. It teaches your immune cells to distinguish between harmless bacteria and dangerous pathogens. It supports the development of regulatory immune cells that prevent excessive inflammation. The bacteria are literally teaching your immune system through the metabolites they produce. Another metabolite produced during fermentation is hydrogen sulfide. This molecule has multiple effects on your physiology. It influences blood vessel function. It influences nerve signal transmission. It influences immune function. Like many microbial metabolites, it can be beneficial in appropriate amounts but harmful in excess. The balance is critical, and the balance depends on the composition of your bacterial community. Consider what happens when you eat a meal rich in fiber. The fiber reaches your colon intact because human digestive enzymes cannot break it down. The bacteria in your colon then get to work. They ferment the fiber, breaking it down into its component parts. This fermentation process generates energy for the bacteria, allowing them to reproduce and thrive. But it also generates short-chain fatty acids, metabolites that travel through your bloodstream and influence your entire physiology. Within minutes to hours of eating fiber-rich food, your blood levels of butyrate increase. This butyrate reaches your brain and begins to influence neuronal function. It increases GABA production, promoting calm. It increases BDNF production, supporting neuronal resilience. You might notice that you feel calmer, more focused, less anxious. You might not realize that this shift is due to the fermentation happening in your colon, to the bacterial metabolites that have just entered your bloodstream. Over the course of hours and days, as your bacterial community continues to ferment the fiber you have consumed, the effects become more profound. Your gut barrier strengthens, your immune system becomes better regulated. Your neuroinflammation decreases. Your mood improves, your energy increases. You feel better in ways that you might attribute to the food you ate, not realizing that the primary benefit is not the food itself, but what the bacteria did with the food. This is why the type of food you eat is so important. When you eat processed foods, refined carbohydrates and unhealthy fats, there is little for your bacteria to ferment. These foods are already broken down. They are easily absorbed by your small intestine. They never reach your colon where fermentation could occur. Without fermentation, your bacteria do not produce the short-chain fatty acids that are so critical to your health. Without these metabolites, your gut barrier weakens. Your immune system becomes dysregulated. Your mood suffers. Your energy declines. But when you eat whole foods rich in fiber, when you eat vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, you are providing your bacteria with the raw materials they need for fermentation. You are literally feeding the fermentation symphony. As your bacteria ferment these foods, they produce the metabolites that support your health. The food itself provides some nutrition, but the metabolites produced by bacterial fermentation provide even more. The bacteria are your partners in creating health. Without them, even the healthiest food cannot fully nourish you. This also explains why the transition to a healthier diet can be uncomfortable. When you suddenly increase your fiber intake, you are providing a sudden abundance of fermentable material to bacteria that might not be accustomed to it. These bacteria ferment rapidly, producing large amounts of gases like hydrogen and methane. You experience bloating, gas, and abdominal discomfort. This is often misinterpreted as a sign that the food is not good for you, but it is actually a sign that fermentation is happening, that your bacteria are becoming active, that the symphony is beginning to play. If you persist, if you continue eating fiber-rich foods, your bacterial community adapts. The bacteria that can efficiently ferment fiber become more abundant. The fermentation becomes more complete and efficient. The gas production decreases. The uncomfortable symptoms resolve. And as the fermentation becomes more efficient, the production of beneficial metabolites increases. You begin to feel better. Your mood improves. Your energy increases. Your digestion becomes smooth. You have successfully re-established the fermentation symphony. The recognition of this process has led to the development of the concept of the microbiome as an organ. Just as your heart is an organ that pumps blood, your liver is an organ that processes toxins. Your microbiome is an organ that ferments food and produces metabolites. It is not separate from you. It is part of you. And like any organ, it requires proper care to function optimally. You must feed it properly. You must protect it from damage. You must support its health. When you do, it supports your health in return. Feeding the invisible civilization. Which foods strengthen your microbial partners? You are not just feeding yourself when you eat. You are feeding the invisible civilization living inside you. Every bite of food is a decision about which bacteria you want to support. Every meal is an opportunity to strengthen the bacterial communities that support your health or to feed the bacteria that undermine it. Understanding this transforms how you think about nutrition. The bacteria in your gut can be roughly divided into two categories based on what they prefer to eat. Some bacteria prefer simple sugars and refined carbohydrates. These bacteria can quickly break down and absorb these simple molecules, gaining energy rapidly. They are like fast food eaters seeking quick energy without much effort. When you eat processed foods, white bread, sugar, and refined carbohydrates, you are feeding these bacteria. They thrive, they reproduce rapidly, they become dominant in your microbial community. Other bacteria prefer complex carbohydrates, fiber, and plant diversity. These bacteria must work harder to break down these complex molecules. They must ferment them, producing the metabolites that support your health. They are like farmers or craftspeople, investing effort to create something of lasting value. When you eat whole grains, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and other plant foods, you are feeding these bacteria. They thrive, they reproduce, they become dominant in your microbial community. The key to supporting your health through diet is to feed the bacteria that support your health. This does not mean you must become vegan or adopt any particular dietary ideology. It means you must eat foods that are rich in fiber and plant diversity, regardless of whether those foods are plant-based or animal-based. A person who eats meat but also eats abundant vegetables, legumes, and whole grains will have a healthier microbiome than a person who eats a plant-based diet but consumes primarily processed plant foods. Specific foods are particularly beneficial for microbiome health. These are often called prebiotic foods because they feed beneficial bacteria. Garlic, onions, leeks, and asparagus contain inulin, a type of fiber that is preferentially fermented by beneficial bacteria like bifidobacterium. When you eat these foods, you are specifically feeding the bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids and support your health. Bananas, especially slightly underripe bananas, contain resistant starch, another prebiotic that feeds beneficial bacteria. Legumes like beans, lentils, and chickpeas are rich in fiber and resistant starch. They are among the most powerful prebiotic foods available. Whole grains like oats, barley, and brown rice are rich in beta-glucans and other fibers that feed beneficial bacteria. Nuts and seeds, particularly flax seeds, chia seeds, and almonds, are rich in fiber, and also contain polyphenols, compounds that have anti-inflammatory effects and that beneficial bacteria preferentially ferment. Fermented foods are also important. When you eat fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and yogurt, you are consuming live beneficial bacteria. These bacteria can establish themselves in your gut and become part of your microbial community. But fermented foods do more than just provide bacteria. The fermentation process breaks down the food into more easily digestible components. It increases the bioavailability of nutrients. It produces metabolites that have beneficial effects on your health. Polyphenol-rich foods are also important. Polyphenols are compounds found in plants that have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. They are found in berries, tea, coffee, dark chocolate, and red wine. When you eat polyphenol-rich foods, you are not just getting the direct antioxidant benefits. You are also providing food for bacteria that ferment polyphenols. As they ferment these compounds, they produce metabolites that have additional health benefits. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts are particularly important. These vegetables contain compounds called glucosinolates that are broken down during digestion and fermentation. The products of this breakdown have potent anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory properties. When you eat cruciferous vegetables, you are supporting bacteria that ferment these compounds, and these bacteria are producing metabolites that protect your health. Bone broth and collagen-rich foods are also beneficial. Bone broth contains gelatin and collagen, which are broken down into amino acids and other compounds. Some of these compounds, particularly the amino acid L-glutamine, support the integrity of your intestinal barrier. They help maintain the tight junctions between the cells that line your colon, preventing the leaky gut that leads to systemic inflammation. The diversity of your diet is also important. Different bacteria prefer different foods. If you eat the same foods every day, only the bacteria that thrive on those specific foods will flourish. Your microbial diversity will decline. But if you eat a wide variety of plant foods, if you rotate your vegetables and fruits, if you try new foods regularly, you support a diverse microbial community. And a diverse microbial community is a resilient microbial community, one that can adapt to challenges and maintain health even when conditions are not optimal. The transition to a diet that supports microbiome health can be challenging. If you have been eating a processed food diet, your bacterial community has adapted to digest these foods. The bacteria that thrive on simple sugars and refined carbohydrates are abundant. When you suddenly shift to a diet rich in fiber and plant diversity, you are essentially starving these bacteria and trying to support bacteria that are not yet abundant. The bacteria that thrive on whole foods will begin to increase, but this takes time. In the interim, you might experience gas, bloating, and digestive discomfort as the bacteria that are present attempt to ferment the new foods you are eating. This discomfort is temporary. It is a sign that change is happening, that your bacterial community is adapting. If you persist, if you continue eating whole foods rich in fiber and plant diversity for several weeks, your bacterial community will shift. The abundance of bacteria that prefer whole foods will increase. The bacteria that prefer processed foods will decline. The fermentation will become more efficient. The gas and bloating will decrease. And as your bacterial community shifts, you will notice improvements in your health. Your energy will increase, your mood will improve, your digestion will become smooth, your cravings will shift. You will find yourself naturally preferring the foods that support your health. This is not about willpower or restriction. This is about working with your biology, about feeding the bacteria that support your health, about allowing your microbiome to guide your food choices. When you feed the bacteria that support your health, they signal you to eat more foods that feed them. When you feed the bacteria that undermine your health, they signal you to eat more foods that feed them. By consciously choosing to feed the beneficial bacteria, you create a virtuous cycle where your food choices and your bacterial community reinforce each other. The consciousness question: are you making decisions or negotiating with trillions? This is the question that perhaps cuts most deeply to the heart of what it means to be human. When you make a decision, when you choose to do something, are you exercising free will? Or are you the product of a negotiation between countless bacteria, each with their own interests and preferences? When you decide to eat something, when you decide to approach someone, when you decide to take a particular action? Are you the one deciding? Or are you simply expressing the collective will of the microbial civilization living inside you? The honest answer is that the distinction between your will and the will of your bacteria is not as clear as we might like it to be. You are not a unified entity with a central consciousness that issues commands to a passive body. You are a parliament, a democracy, a federation where different voices have different levels of influence. Some of those voices are your own conscious intentions. Others are the voices of your bacteria, expressed through hunger, desire, emotion, and intuition. When you feel hungry, you interpret this as your body telling you that it needs food. But hunger is actually a complex signal that involves multiple factors. Your stomach sends signals when it is empty. Your blood glucose levels influence how hungry you feel. But your bacteria also send signals. Certain bacteria produce metabolites that increase your appetite. Others produce metabolites that decrease it. When you feel hungry, you are experiencing a combination of your own physiological needs and the signals from your bacterial partners. When you feel a craving for a particular food, you might think that this is your preference, your desire. But cravings are often microbial communications. The bacteria that thrive on a particular food produce metabolites that make you crave that food. You experience this craving as your own desire, not realizing that it is actually a bacterial request. If you had a different microbial community, you would crave different foods. When you feel attracted to someone, when you experience sexual desire, when you feel a sense of connection with another person, you might think that these feelings are entirely your own. But as we discussed earlier, these feelings are partially shaped by your bacterial community. The bacteria that produce adequate dopamine and oxytocin support your capacity for connection and desire. Without them, you would not feel these things. When you feel anxious, when you feel afraid, you might think that these emotions are caused by external circumstances or by your own irrational thinking. But they are also partially shaped by your bacterial community. The bacteria that produce adequate GABA and serotonin support your capacity for calm and courage. When these bacteria are absent or in decline, anxiety and fear become your default emotional state. This raises a profound philosophical question. If so much of your behavior is shaped by bacteria, if so much of what you experience as your own desires and preferences are actually bacterial communications, to what extent are your decisions truly your own? To what extent are you exercising agency and free will? One way to think about this is to recognize that agency and free will are not all or nothing propositions. You do not need to be completely in control of all aspects of your behavior in order to have meaningful agency. Even if some of your decisions are influenced by bacteria, you still have the capacity to examine those influences, to understand them, and to make choices based on that understanding. You have agency, not because you are completely free from influences, but because you can become conscious of those influences and respond to them with awareness. Consider a simple example. You are sitting at home and suddenly feel a craving for ice cream. You know that ice cream is not good for your health. You have consciously decided that you want to eat healthier, yet you feel drawn to the ice cream, almost against your will. You might interpret this as a failure of willpower. But what if you understood that this craving is coming from bacteria in your gut that thrive on sugar? What if you recognized that the bacteria are sending you a signal? At this point, you have a choice. You can act on the craving unconsciously, attributing it to yourself, assuming that you simply lack willpower. Or you can act on it with awareness, recognizing that you are responding to a bacterial signal. In the second case, you still might choose to eat the ice cream, but you are making the choice consciously with full awareness of what is influencing you. You are not a victim of your own desires. You are a conscious participant in a negotiation. This distinction is important because it opens up new possibilities for change. If you believe that your cravings are simply expressions of your own preferences, that they are unchangeable aspects of who you are, then you have limited options. You can either satisfy the craving or try to resist it through willpower. But if you understand that your cravings are partially microbial communications, that they are shaped by your bacterial community, then you have another option. You can work to change your bacterial community. You can feed the bacteria that support your health and gradually shift your cravings in that direction. This is where the question of consciousness becomes truly interesting. In what sense are you conscious? What does consciousness mean if so much of your behavior is shaped by bacteria? One perspective is that consciousness is not about being completely independent from all influences. Consciousness is about awareness. It is about being able to observe your own behavior, to understand the factors that influence you, to make choices based on that understanding. In this sense, you can be conscious even if your behavior is partially shaped by bacteria. In fact, the more conscious you become of the factors that influence you, the more agency you have. Another perspective is that the distinction between you and your bacteria is not as clear as we might like it to be. You are not separate from your bacteria. You are a collaboration with them. In this sense, when your bacteria influence your behavior, they are not manipulating an external entity. They are expressing their preferences as part of a larger system that includes you. Your consciousness is not just your individual consciousness. It is a collaborative consciousness that emerges from the negotiation between your own intentions and the intentions of your bacterial partners. This raises questions about what it means to be an individual. We tend to think of individuals as discrete, bounded entities, each with a clear beginning and end. But this understanding is challenged by our recognition of the microbiome. You are not a discrete entity. You are a collection of entities, a federation of different organisms, all working together to create the experience of being you. Your individuality is real, but it is not as simple or as clear as we might have assumed. This also has implications for how we think about mental health and personal change. If you are struggling with depression, with anxiety, with addiction, with any form of psychological suffering, it is tempting to blame yourself, to assume that you are weak, that you lack willpower, that you are fundamentally flawed. But the recognition of the microbiome offers an alternative perspective. Your psychological suffering might not be a personal failing. It might be a reflection of a dysbiotic microbiome, a bacterial community that is not supporting your mental health. By changing your bacterial community, by feeding the bacteria that support your health, you might be able to change your psychological state without relying on willpower or blame. The question of consciousness and free will is not easily answered, but the recognition of the microbiome suggests that the answer is more nuanced than we might have thought. You are not purely free and you are not purely determined. You are a negotiation, say a collaboration, a democracy where multiple voices have influence. Your agency lies not in being completely free from all influences, but in becoming conscious of those influences and choosing how to respond to them. And one of the most powerful ways you can exercise that agency is by supporting the health of your bacterial partners. The trillions of beings that are, in a very real sense, you. Microbial memory, how bacteria remember and teach your immune system. There is a form of memory that occurs in your body that is not stored in your brain. It is not recorded in your neurons or your synapses. It is stored in your bacteria. Your bacterial community remembers every pathogen you have ever encountered. It remembers every food you have ever eaten. It remembers every environmental challenge your body has faced. And it uses this memory to teach your immune system how to respond to future challenges. This process is called immune training, and it is one of the most important functions of your microbiome. Your immune system is not born knowing how to respond to pathogens. It must learn, and much of this learning comes from your bacteria. The bacteria in your gut are constantly communicating with your immune cells, telling them about the pathogens they have encountered, teaching them which organisms are dangerous and which are benign, which should be attacked and which should be tolerated. This process begins early in life, even before you are born. In the womb, you are exposed to bacterial metabolites that cross the placenta and reach your developing immune system. After birth, when you are exposed to bacteria in your environment, your immune system is already partially primed by the bacteria in your mother's microbiome. This is why children born to mothers with healthy microbiomes tend to have better immune function than children born to mothers with dysbiotic microbiomes. As you grow, as you are exposed to more and more pathogens and environmental challenges, your bacterial community accumulates knowledge. The bacteria that have encountered a particular pathogen remember it. They produce metabolites that tell your immune cells about the threat. Your immune cells respond by producing antibodies, immune proteins, that recognize and attack the specific pathogen. If you encounter the same pathogen again, your immune system responds more quickly and more effectively because it has learned from the bacteria, which have encountered this pathogen before. This is the basis of immunity. It is why you do not get certain diseases twice. You get chickenpox once, and your immune system learns to recognize and attack the chickenpox virus. If you encounter it again, your immune system responds so quickly that you do not get sick. This same principle applies to many other pathogens and challenges. The remarkable thing is that this memory is stored not just in your own immune cells, but in your bacterial community. If you were to suddenly lose your immune system, if your immune cells were eliminated, your bacteria would still remember. They would still have the knowledge of all the pathogens they have encountered. If your immune system were rebuilt, if new immune cells were produced, your bacteria could teach these new cells what they need to know. The memory is redundant. It is stored in multiple places, in your immune cells and in your bacteria. This has implications for understanding autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases occur when your immune system loses the ability to distinguish between your own cells and foreign pathogens. It begins attacking your own body. The causes of autoimmune disease are complex and multifactorial, but one factor is dysbiosis. When your bacterial community is dysbiotic, when the bacteria that normally teach your immune system are absent, your immune system becomes confused. It loses the training that prevents it from attacking your own cells. This is why dysbiosis is associated with increased rates of autoimmune disease. The reverse is also true. When you restore a healthy bacterial community, when you cultivate bacteria that properly train your immune system, autoimmune disease often improves. This does not mean that microbiome restoration is a cure for autoimmune disease, but it is a powerful tool that has been largely overlooked in the treatment of these conditions. There is another dimension to microbial memory that is even more remarkable. Some research suggests that bacteria can pass on information not just within your body, but to other bacteria. When bacteria encounter a pathogen, they can produce metabolites that alert neighboring bacteria to the threat. They can share genetic material that encodes resistance to the pathogen. They can essentially train each other. This means that the knowledge accumulated by your bacterial community is not just stored in individual bacteria, but is shared and distributed throughout the community. There is also evidence that microbial memory can be passed from one generation to the next, at least in some cases. When a mother passes her bacteria to her child during birth, she is not just passing on bacteria, she is passing on the accumulated experience of her bacterial community. The child's bacteria inherit, in some sense, the memory of all the pathogens and challenges that the mother's bacteria have encountered. This is one of the reasons why children born to mothers with robust immune systems tend to have better immune function than children born to mothers with compromised immune systems. The implications of this understanding are profound. Your bacterial community is not just a collection of individual organisms. It is a collective intelligence, a system of distributed memory and learning. When you support the health of your bacterial community, you are not just supporting your own health. You are preserving a library of knowledge that has been accumulated over your lifetime. You are maintaining a system that teaches your immune system how to protect you. This also suggests that the disruption of your microbiome through antibiotics, through diet, through stress, is not just a disruption of your digestion or your mood. It is a disruption of your immune memory. It is a loss of accumulated knowledge. When you take antibiotics and eliminate vast numbers of bacteria, you are erasing part of your immune system's training. When you later encounter a pathogen that your bacteria had learned to recognize, your immune system might not respond as effectively because it has lost the bacterial teachers that would have alerted it to the threat. This is why the overuse of antibiotics is so concerning. Yes, antibiotics save lives by eliminating dangerous pathogens, but they also erase the memory stored in your bacterial community. They disrupt the training of your immune system. Over time, if you are exposed to antibiotics repeatedly, your immune system becomes less well-trained, less able to protect you from threats. The recognition of microbial memory has led to new approaches to immune health. Instead of trying to kill all bacteria, Instead of pursuing the goal of a sterile body, the focus is shifting towards supporting a diverse, healthy bacterial community that can teach your immune system effectively. This involves exposure to diverse environmental bacteria, consumption of fermented foods that provide beneficial bacteria, avoidance of unnecessary antibiotics, and support of healthy lifestyle practices that allow beneficial bacteria to thrive. There is also growing interest in the use of probiotics and prebiotics to support immune training. By consuming specific beneficial bacteria or by eating foods that feed beneficial bacteria, you are providing your immune system with teachers that help it learn to respond appropriately to threats. This is a fundamentally different approach from the traditional approach of trying to kill bacteria. It is an approach that recognizes that bacteria are not just enemies to be destroyed, but partners that support your health. The Reset Protocol, rebuilding your internal colony for transformation. If you have recognized that your microbiome is dysbiotic, if you have understood that your health, your mood, your behavior are being undermined by an imbalanced bacterial community, you might be wondering, what can I do about it? How can I restore my microbiome to health? The answer is that there is no single reset button, no single intervention that will instantly restore health. But there is a process, a protocol that has been shown to be effective for many people. This protocol involves multiple steps taken over time that gradually shift your bacterial community toward health. The first step is to reduce the factors that are maintaining dysbiosis. If you are taking antibiotics unnecessarily, you should work with your doctor to determine which antibiotics are truly necessary and which can be avoided. If you are eating a diet high in processed foods and refined carbohydrates, you should begin to transition toward a diet rich in whole foods and fiber. If you are under chronic stress, you should begin to implement stress reduction practices. If you are not sleeping well, you should work on improving your sleep. These changes address the root causes of dysbiosis and create conditions where beneficial bacteria can begin to thrive. The second step is to begin consuming foods that feed beneficial bacteria. This means increasing your intake of fiber, of whole grains, of vegetables, of legumes, of nuts and seeds. It means including fermented foods in your diet, foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and yogurt. These foods provide both the raw materials that beneficial bacteria need and also provide the bacteria themselves, in the case of fermented foods. Start slowly, especially if you are coming from a low-fiber diet. Increase your intake gradually to avoid excessive gas and bloating as your bacterial community adapts. The third step is to consider taking a probiotic supplement. Probiotics are live beneficial bacteria that can establish themselves in your gut and become part of your microbial community. However, it is important to choose high-quality probiotics that contain strains that have been shown to be beneficial. Not all probiotics are created equal. Some contain bacteria that are not well suited to human digestion. Others contain bacteria that do not survive the journey through your stomach acid. Look for probiotics that contain strains like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium that are enteric-coated to protect them from stomach acid, and that contain a reasonable number of live organisms. The fourth step is to reduce foods that feed harmful bacteria. This primarily means reducing sugar and refined carbohydrates. It also means reducing unhealthy fats and highly processed foods. This does not mean you must be perfect, but you should aim to reduce these foods significantly. As you reduce them, the bacteria that thrive on them will decline, and the bacteria that thrive on whole foods will have more opportunity to establish themselves. The fifth step is to support your immune system in ways that teach it to tolerate beneficial bacteria. This involves exposure to diverse environmental bacteria. This might mean spending time in nature, allowing yourself to be exposed to soil and environmental bacteria. It might mean playing in the dirt if you have children. It might mean reducing excessive hygiene in your home. You do not need to abandon basic hygiene, but excessive use of antibacterial soaps and sanitizers prevents beneficial bacteria from establishing themselves. The sixth step is to manage stress and improve sleep. Both of these are critical for microbiome health. Chronic stress dysregulates your gut, promoting dysbiosis. Poor sleep disrupts the circadian rhythms of your bacteria, preventing them from functioning optimally. By implementing stress reduction practices like meditation, yoga, deep breathing, and by improving your sleep hygiene, you create conditions where beneficial bacteria can thrive. The seventh step is to be patient. Microbiome restoration is not a quick process. It can take weeks or months for significant shifts in your bacterial community to occur. You might not notice improvements immediately, but if you persist, if you continue implementing these practices, you will likely begin to notice changes. Your digestion will improve, your mood will improve, your energy will increase, your cravings will shift. Over time, these improvements will compound. The transformation can be profound. It is also important to recognize that this process is not linear. You might have good weeks and difficult weeks. You might experience temporary setbacks. This is normal. The process of shifting your bacterial community is like turning a large ship. It takes time, it takes persistence, but if you maintain your course, you will eventually reach your destination. There are also some specific interventions that some people find helpful. Bone broth, which contains gelatin and collagen, can support the integrity of your intestinal barrier. Specific supplements like L-glutamine and zinc carnosine can also support intestinal health. Herbal remedies like slippery elm and aloe vera have been traditionally used to support digestive health. However, these should be used in conjunction with the foundational practices of dietary change, stress management, and sleep improvement, not as replacements for them. It is also important to work with a healthcare provider who understands the importance of microbiome health. Many conventional doctors are not yet well versed in microbiome science, but there is a growing number of practitioners who specialize in this area. A functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor who understands microbiome science can provide guidance tailored to your specific situation. The reset protocol is not a quick fix. It is a commitment to a new way of living, a new way of relating to your body, a new way of understanding yourself. But for many people, this commitment leads to a transformation that exceeds their expectations. They recover their health. They recover their sense of self. They discover that they have more agency, more choice, more freedom than they realized. They become conscious partners in the negotiation with their bacterial communities, actively supporting the bacteria that support their health. Coexistence wisdom, living consciously with your bacterial self. The recognition that you are not a unified individual, but a collaboration with trillions of bacteria, transforms how you must live. It changes your relationship with your body, with your desires, with your decisions. It requires a new form of wisdom, say a wisdom of coexistence, an understanding of how to live consciously with your bacterial partners. The first principle of this wisdom is recognition. You must recognize that you are not alone in your body. You must recognize that many of the sensations, desires, and emotions you experience are not purely your own, but are communications from your bacterial partners. This recognition does not diminish your agency. It expands it. When you recognize that a craving is a bacterial communication rather than a personal preference, you gain the ability to respond to it with awareness rather than unconsciously. The second principle is gratitude. Your bacterial partners are not enemies, they are not invaders. They are collaborators in the most fundamental sense. They are helping you digest your food, producing vitamins you cannot produce yourself, training your immune system, manufacturing the neurotransmitters that support your mental health. Without them, you would not be able to survive. By cultivating gratitude for your bacterial partners, you shift your relationship with them from one of conflict to one of cooperation. The third principle is communication. Your bacteria communicate with you through hunger, through craving, through emotion, through sensation. By learning to listen to these communications, by trying to understand what your bacteria are trying to tell you, you gain insight into your own biology. When you feel a craving for vegetables, your bacteria are telling you that they need fiber. When you feel anxious, your bacteria might be telling you that they are not producing adequate calming neurotransmitters. By listening to these communications, by understanding what they mean, you can respond more effectively. The fourth principle is partnership. You are not trying to control your bacteria. You are not trying to dominate them or kill them or suppress them. You are trying to partner with them. You are trying to create conditions where the bacteria that support your health can thrive. This requires understanding what these bacteria need, what they prefer to eat, what conditions allow them to flourish. It requires working with them rather than against them. The fifth principle is consistency. Restoring and maintaining a healthy microbiome is not something you do once and then forget about. It is something you must commit to continuously. Every meal is an opportunity to either support or undermine your bacterial partners. Every day is an opportunity to either create conditions where beneficial bacteria thrive or conditions where harmful bacteria thrive. This consistency is not burdensome, it is liberating, because as you maintain your commitment, as you continue to support your bacterial partners, your own desires begin to align with this commitment. You find yourself naturally preferring the foods that feed beneficial bacteria. You find yourself naturally engaging in practices that support microbiome health. The sixth principle is self-compassion. You will not be perfect. You will have days when you eat foods that do not support your microbiome. You will have days when you are stressed and cannot sleep well. You will have days when you feel anxious or depressed despite your best efforts. This is normal. This is human. Rather than judging yourself for these lapses, rather than assuming that you have failed, you can approach them with compassion. You can recognize that supporting your microbiome is a long-term practice, not something that can be done perfectly. You can forgive yourself for your imperfections and simply recommit to your practice. The seventh principle is flexibility. The protocol for supporting microbiome health that I described in the previous section is a general guide. But your specific situation might require modifications. You might have food sensitivities or allergies that require you to avoid certain foods that are generally beneficial. You might have genetic variations that affect how you process certain nutrients. You might have health conditions that require specific medical interventions. The key is to take the principles of microbiome supporting eating and lifestyle and adapt them to your specific situation. Work with a healthcare provider if needed. Listen to your body. Be willing to experiment and to adjust your approach based on what you learn. The eighth principle is integration. Supporting your microbiome is not separate from other aspects of your life and health. It is integrated with your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, your social health. When you improve your microbiome, you often improve all of these other dimensions as well. When you work on your mental health through therapy or meditation, you often improve your microbiome as well. The different aspects of your health are interconnected. By supporting your microbiome, you are supporting your whole self. And by supporting your whole self, you are supporting your microbiome. The ninth principle is wonder. The relationship between you and your bacteria is one of the most remarkable relationships in nature. You are living in intimate collaboration with trillions of beings, each with their own biology, their own metabolism, their own interests. Yet somehow through millions of years of evolution, you have developed a relationship where your interests and their interests are largely aligned. You survive and thrive together. This is not something to take for granted. This is something to marvel at. By cultivating wonder at this relationship, by recognizing the profound beauty of what you are, you deepen your commitment to supporting it. The 10th principle is perspective. In the grand scheme of things, you are not just an individual human living your individual life. You are a host to a civilization of bacteria. You are a participant in an ecosystem of life. You are part of the larger living world. By recognizing this, by understanding your place in the larger web of life, you gain perspective on your own problems and challenges. Your individual struggles matter, but they are also part of something much larger. This perspective can be both humbling and liberating. Living consciously with your bacterial self means living with awareness, with gratitude, with partnership, with consistency, with self-compassion, with flexibility, with integration, with wonder, and with perspective. It means recognizing that you are not separate from the living world inside you, but are intimately connected to it. It means understanding that your health is not just your individual achievement, but is the result of cooperation with your bacterial partners. It means committing to practices that support the health of this collaboration. And it means recognizing that in supporting your bacteria, you are supporting yourself. The eternal negotiation, your future as a collaborative being. As we come to the end of this exploration, we arrive at a question that is both ancient and utterly contemporary. What does it mean to be human in a world where we understand ourselves not as individuals but as collaborations? What does the future hold for beings like us, who are beginning to recognize our true nature as hosts to vast civilizations of bacteria? The answer is that the future is not predetermined. It is something we are creating through our choices, through our practices, through our commitment to understanding and supporting the collaboration that we are. There are multiple possible futures, and which one we move toward depends on the decisions we make today. One possible future is that we continue on the path we have been on. We continue to use antibiotics indiscriminately. We continue to eat processed foods that feed harmful bacteria. We continue to live in ways that stress our bodies and dysregulate our microbiomes. In this future, rates of dysbiosis increase. Rates of autoimmune disease, allergies, mental health disorders, and metabolic disease continue to rise. We become increasingly dependent on medications to manage conditions that are actually rooted in microbiome dysbiosis. We lose the wisdom of how to live in partnership with our bacterial selves. Another possible future is that we awaken to the importance of microbiome health. We begin to teach children from an early age about the bacteria living inside them, about how to support their health, about how to listen to their communications. We change our food systems to produce foods that support human microbiome health rather than foods that support industrial agriculture. We use antibiotics only when truly necessary. We create healthcare systems that recognize the microbiome as a central organ and that focus on supporting microbiome health rather than just treating symptoms of disease. In this future, rates of chronic disease decline. People feel better. They have more energy, more clarity, more resilience. They understand themselves as collaborations and live consciously with that understanding. There is also a middle path, which is perhaps the most likely. We will gradually awaken to the importance of microbiome health, but this awakening will be uneven and incomplete. Some people will embrace this understanding and transform their lives. Others will resist it, clinging to older understandings of health and disease. Healthcare systems will slowly begin to incorporate microbiome science, but this change will be slow and will often meet resistance from entrenched interests. The food industry will slowly begin to change, but this change will be driven by market forces and consumer demand, rather than by any overarching commitment to health. Over time, as more and more people experience the benefits of supporting their microbiome, as more and more healthcare providers incorporate this understanding into their practice, the awareness will spread. The future will be better than it is now, but not as good as it could be. Regardless of which future we move toward, one thing is clear: the relationship between humans and bacteria will remain central to human health and well-being. The bacteria in your gut will continue to influence your mood, your appetite, your desires, your fears, your personality. The question is not whether they will influence you, but whether you will be conscious of that influence. Will you understand it and work with it? Or will you remain unconscious of it, experiencing your bacterial partner's influence as if it were your own autonomous choice? The awakening to the reality of the microbiome is one of the most important scientific and philosophical realizations of our time. It challenges our fundamental assumptions about individuality, about agency, about what it means to be human. It suggests that we are not isolated consciousnesses trapped in meat. We are collaborations, democracies, federations of different forms of life, all working together to create the experience of being human. This realization should not be depressing. It should not make you feel like you are a puppet controlled by bacteria. Rather, it should be liberating, because understanding the factors that influence you gives you more agency, not less. When you recognize that your cravings are partially bacterial communications, you gain the ability to respond to them consciously. When you understand that your mood is partially shaped by your microbiome, you gain the ability to support your mood by supporting your microbiome. When you recognize that you are a collaboration with bacteria, you gain the ability to consciously support that collaboration. The future of humanity is intimately connected to our ability to understand and support the collaboration that we are. As we face challenges like climate change, like pandemics, like increasing rates of chronic disease. We need new ways of thinking about ourselves and our relationship to the living world. The recognition of the microbiome offers one such way of thinking. It offers a model of collaboration, of partnership, of mutual dependence. It suggests that we do not solve our problems through dominance and control, but through understanding and partnership. In your own life, in your own body, you have the opportunity to practice this principle. You have the opportunity to recognize your bacterial partners, to understand their needs, to support their health, and through that support, to support your own health. You have the opportunity to live consciously with the understanding that you are a collaboration, that you are not alone in your body, that your health is the result of partnership with trillions of other beings. This practice, this commitment, this way of living is not just good for your individual health. It is an act of wisdom. It is an alignment with the truth of what you are. It is a recognition that you are not separate from the living world, but are part of it. You are a host to bacteria, yes, but you are also a partner with them. You are collaborators in the creation of a living, conscious being. And as you support that collaboration, as you feed the bacteria that support your health, as you listen to their communications and respond with awareness, you are participating in something profound. You are participating in the eternal negotiation between different forms of life, the negotiation that creates the possibility of consciousness, of meaning, of being human. The journey we have taken together through these explorations has been a journey toward greater awareness, greater understanding, greater consciousness. We have looked at the invisible parliament of bacteria that lives within you. We have examined the chemical messengers they produce, the way they influence your mood and your behavior. We have looked at the ancient alliance that has bound humans and bacteria together for hundreds of thousands of years. We have explored how bacteria influence your appetite, your desires, your fears. We have recognized how they shape your personality and how dysbiosis undermines your health. We have understood the fermentation symphony of digestion and the foods that support beneficial bacteria. We have grappled with the consciousness question and recognized that agency is more complex than we might have thought. We have learned about microbial memory and how bacteria teach your immune system. We have explored the protocol for resetting and rebuilding your microbiome. We have contemplated the wisdom of coexistence and how to live consciously with our bacterial selves. And now, as we conclude this exploration, we recognize that this is not an ending. This is a beginning. This is the beginning of your conscious partnership with your bacterial self. This is the beginning of your journey toward greater health, greater awareness, greater consciousness. This is the beginning of your participation in the eternal negotiation that is life itself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this experience has brought you insight, if it has deepened your understanding of yourself, if it has inspired you to support the health of your microbiome and the collaboration that you are, I would appreciate a like and a subscription to the Relaxing Science channel. Also, let us know in the comments if you would like to see more content like this. Share your thoughts about your relationship with your bacterial partners. Share how this understanding has changed your perspective on your own health and well-being. May you go forward with greater awareness, greater wisdom, greater consciousness of the remarkable collaboration that you are. May you support the health of your bacterial partners, and through that support your own flourishing. May you live consciously with the understanding that you are not separate from the living world, but are intimately connected to it. May you recognize the wonder and beauty of being a collaborative being, a host to a civilization of bacteria, a participant in the eternal dance of life itself. The negotiation continues. The collaboration persists. The conversation between your consciousness and your bacteria goes on, moment by moment, breath by breath, in the vast and invisible landscape of your body. And in that conversation, in that eternal negotiation, you are creating who you are, what you feel, what you desire, and ultimately, what it means to be human. Total.